Emma Walker stood at the window of her Seattle home, watching her husband Daniel load his suitcase into the back of the rideshare car waiting in the driveway. The sky hung low and gray, the kind of northwest morning that made everything look softer, heavier, almost blurred with quiet sorrow. Daniel turned back once, gave her a quick smile that didn't quite reach his eyes and said, "I'll call you tonight." Before slipping into the car and pulling the door shut with a dull thud, she lifted her hand in a half-wave, feeling foolish because he didn't see it, and then the car rolled away, leaving behind nothing but the fading echo of tires on wet pavement and a silence she had come to know too well. Inside the house, the quiet wrapped around her like a blanket she never asked for. Daniel traveled often for work, but this time felt different. For months he had been swallowed by endless meetings, late-night emails, and constant excuses that sounded more tired each time he repeated them. He wasn't unkind, he wasn't angry, he wasn't cold. He was just absent, as if some part of him had slipped into a place she couldn't reach. What haunted her wasn't what he did or didn't do, but the empty space between them that kept widening no matter how many times she tried to close it. She made herself a cup of coffee she didn't really want and walked through the house slowly, as though she were searching for something she had lost. The living room still smelled faintly of Daniel's cologne, the kind he wore only out of habit now. Emma stopped at the edge of the room, holding her mug with both hands, her fingers tightening around it as she felt a familiar ache rising inside her. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't explosive. It was the quiet pain of being unseen by someone who once knew every corner of her heart. She wondered if Daniel even realized how far away he had drifted from her, or if he had simply grown used to the distance. By mid-afternoon, the rain had returned in gentle waves, soft enough to blur the view through the windows but steady enough to make the world outside look washed and lonely. Emma paced the hallway without meaning to, her steps echoing faintly, reminding her that she was alone in a house built for two. She tried reading, cleaning, scrolling through her phone, anything to drown out the feeling that her life had become a waiting room. Waiting for Daniel to call, waiting for him to care, waiting for her marriage to feel alive again. Around 6 in the evening, she finally admitted she couldn't spend another hour talking only to her own thoughts. She called her sister, Lily, who lived across town. Lily answered with her usual bright voice, filling the silence Emma had been dragging around all day. "Come over," she said. "You sound like you need company." And she was right. Emma booked a cab without hesitating, wanting desperately to step out of the suffocating quiet of her home. As she waited outside under the small porch roof, the rain glistened on the street like spilled silver. The cab pulled up with headlights cutting through the mist. The driver leaned out slightly and called, "Are you Emma?" His voice was warm, steady, deep enough to carry through the rain without sounding harsh. She nodded and stepped inside, pulling the door shut behind her, shaking off droplets from her coat as she settled into the seat. The driver was a man in his early 30s, maybe a couple of years older than she was. He had dark hair, neatly pulled back, strong hands on the wheel, and eyes that held a calmness she hadn't felt around anyone in months. "Rough weather today," he said with a small smile as he pulled away from the curb. She nodded, grateful for the simple kindness in his tone. The city lights flickered across his face as they drove, and for the first time that day, Emma felt the tightness in her chest loosen just a little. Michael. That was his name. She noticed it printed on the small ID clipped to his dashboard. Didn't pry or push for conversation, but his presence had a strange grounding effect. As they moved through the rain-soaked streets, Emma found herself letting out a small sigh she hadn't realized she was holding. Michael glanced at her through the mirror, not in a nosy way but with gentle concern. "Long day?" he asked softly. She hesitated, then answered with a simple, "Long month." And even that small truth felt like a weight leaving her body. Michael nodded as though he understood without needing details, and somehow that quiet understanding made her speak again. She told him her husband had just left on another work trip, her voice low, steady, not dramatic, more tired than anything. She didn't complain or blame, she just said what she felt, that the house felt too big when she was alone, that the nights stretched longer when Daniel was gone, that she sometimes wondered if he even noticed how hard she tried to reach him. Michael didn't interrupt, didn't try to solve her life, didn't give empty advice. He simply listened, and that small act felt like a kindness she hadn't expected to find in the backseat of a cab. His silence wasn't cold, it was comforting, like someone sitting beside you during a storm even if they couldn't stop the rain. When they reached Lily's house, Emma felt a strange reluctance to step out. She thanked him quietly, and he gave her a soft nod. "Take care of yourself," he said, and something about the sincerity in his voice echoed in her mind long after she closed the door behind her. Lily greeted her with warmth and chatter, but even as they talked, Emma still felt the calm weight of Michael's presence lingering in her thoughts, like a voice reminding her she wasn't invisible. Hours later, as the night deepened, Emma ordered a cab home, not knowing who would pick her up. When she stepped outside, rain dripping from the edge of the porch roof, her breath caught slightly when she saw the same car pull up. Michael stepped out to open the back door before she could reach it, giving her a gentle, familiar smile that warmed the cold night air around her. "Back home?" he asked, and she nodded with a small grateful laugh she hadn't planned on. The ride back felt different from the earlier one, lighter somehow, filled with small conversations that came naturally. She learned he had grown up in Tacoma, that he had once studied art but drove cabs because it gave him time to breathe, that he liked rainy nights because they made the city feel honest. She found herself responding with ease, telling him things she rarely admitted out loud, not secrets, not intimate details, just pieces of herself she didn't usually share with strangers. His voice was steady, calm, the kind that eased the knots inside her. When the car stopped in front of her house, Emma stayed seated for a heartbeat longer than she should have, looking at the warm light glowing from her porch, a brightness that didn't match the coldness she felt inside. The moment she crossed that threshold alone, she turned slightly, and Michael met her eyes in the mirror, something unspoken moving between them, not romantic, not sharp, just human, an understanding that two strangers had crossed paths on a night when one of them needed it more than she could admit. "Have a good night, Emma," he said, his tone soft, respectful, holding no expectations. She whispered thank you, stepped out of the cab, and walked slowly toward her door. When she looked back one last time, the cab was still there, engine humming quietly, as if giving her a moment to breathe before the night swallowed her again. Then the lights blinked, the car pulled away, and she was alone once more inside. The house greeted her with its familiar emptiness, but something in her had shifted quietly. She still felt lonely, still felt the ache of Daniel's absence, but the silence didn't feel as heavy as before, because for a few hours on a rainy Seattle night, someone had looked at her, listened to her, and made her feel visible again. She stood in her living room, breathing in deeply, wondering why. A simple cab ride had shaken her more than her husband's departure that morning. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she knew something inside her had begun to move, something she couldn't ignore for much longer, and the night, with all its quiet weight, felt different now, like the beginning of something she wasn't prepared for, something she couldn't name, something that would change more than she realized. Emma woke up the next morning with a strange mix of calm and restlessness, the kind that made her feel both lighter and unsettled at the same time. The memory of the cab ride, Michael's steady voice, the quiet understanding in his eyes, lingered in her thoughts like soft echoes she hadn't asked for but couldn't push away. She tried to brush it off, telling herself it was nothing, just a kind driver on a lonely night. But her heart didn't accept the explanation as easily as her mind tried to. Rain still touched the windows with gentle taps, and the Seattle sky carried that usual muted gray that made everything feel slower, softer. Emma wrapped herself in a sweater and walked through the house, noticing how her footsteps sounded louder without Daniel's presence. She had grown used to moving around quietly so she wouldn't distract him during his calls, but now the silence was her only company. She made breakfast she barely touched, checked her phone twice hoping Daniel might have texted, and found nothing waiting for her except a generic message he sent late last night. "Made it to Chicago, long day, talk tomorrow." There was no question about how she was doing, no reminder that he missed her, no warmth she used to find in his words. By noon, she felt the walls around her closing in again, the quiet too sharp, too heavy. She decided to visit the small bookstore she loved downtown, a place that always gave her a bit of comfort. She didn't think twice when she opened the rideshare app, typing out the address with quick fingers. She told herself she didn't care who the driver would be, but when the confirmation screen flashed Michael's name, her heart lifted in a way she didn't know how to stop. She stepped outside, pulling her hood up against the drizzle, and there he was, leaning slightly against the cab, holding the door open for her with a warm, easy smile. "Good morning, Emma," he said, as though greeting a familiar friend. She returned the smile without meaning to, surprised by the little flicker of happiness rising inside her. "Morning," she replied, climbing into the back seat. From the moment the car pulled away from the curb, the atmosphere felt completely different from the previous night. It wasn't heavy or sad, it was calm, almost gentle, like stepping into a place where she didn't have to pretend everything was fine. Michael drove with relaxed confidence, one hand steady on the wheel. the other adjusting the radio to soft instrumental music that blended perfectly with the rainy day. He didn't force conversation, yet somehow, the silence felt comfortable, not empty. After a few minutes, he glanced at her through the mirror with a quiet, thoughtful expression. "You look a little more awake today," he said, not teasing, just observing. She laughed softly, surprised at how natural it felt. "I'm trying," she replied. "Yesterday just felt long." He nodded, reminding her of the way he listened, steady, patient, present. The conversation picked up from there, flowing easily. She told him she was on her way to a bookstore she loved, and he asked what kind of stories she liked. She admitted she preferred emotional stories, the kind that made her feel deeply, maybe because her own life often felt stuck between silence and routine. Michael shared that he once wanted to write graphic novels, stories filled with moments that felt real, not perfect. His voice had a quiet passion when he spoke about art, and Emma found herself drawn to the way his words carried emotion even when he wasn't trying to impress anyone. They passed familiar streets, storefronts glowing through the rain, people rushing under umbrellas, but inside the cab, everything felt slower, safer. Emma didn't realize how much she needed a space where she could breathe until she felt it around her. She told Michael she sometimes felt like she was fading in her own life, disappearing around the edges, and he listened with a seriousness that made her chest tighten with gratitude. He didn't tell her she was wrong or dramatic. He didn't offer quick solutions. He just said, "That sounds lonely," in a voice soft enough to break something open inside her. She reached the bookstore too soon, wanting the ride to last longer. When he pulled up to the curb, she didn't move right away. He noticed, of course he noticed. His eyes met hers in the mirror with gentle understanding. "Take your time," he said. She gave a small laugh at herself before finally stepping out, thanking him more sincerely than she expected to. He nodded and drove away, but the moment stayed in her chest like a warm ember she wasn't ready to let go of. Inside the bookstore, she wandered through aisles without truly seeing the books around her. Her thoughts kept circling back to the calm she felt in the cab, the connection that had grown in a single night and morning. It wasn't romantic, she told herself firmly. It wasn't anything close to dangerous. It was simply comfort, human connection, the kind she had been starved for without realizing how much she missed it. But the truth pressed quietly at the edge of her awareness. She hadn't felt that seen, that understood in a long time, not even by Daniel. After about an hour, she bought a small journal, telling herself she would start writing more to clear her mind. She didn't admit, even to herself, that the idea came from hearing Michael talk about art with so much sincerity. She stepped back outside, and the drizzle had softened to a mist, blurring the skyline. She pulled out her phone, hesitating for a moment, wondering if she should walk a little or take another cab. But her tired feet won the battle, and she opened the app again. When she saw Michael's name appear once more, she felt a rush of something sharp and warm run through her. She told herself it was coincidence, nothing more, and stepped into the car as he opened the door with the same polite smile. "Back home?" he asked. She nodded, settling in, and this time the silence that followed felt like an invitation to breathe again. Their second ride of the day carried a deeper ease, less guarded, more open. The rain brushed softly against the windows, and inside the car, Emma felt herself speaking with new honesty. She told him small things. How she used to paint years ago, how she stopped because life got too busy, how she felt guilty even wanting something for herself. Michael listened like every word mattered, his eyes flicking toward her in the mirror with the kind of attention that made her feel steady. Not judged, not pitted. He shared pieces of his own life too, not dramatic stories, just simple truths. How he liked meeting new people, how driving gave him time to think, how he believed everyone carried heavy stories beneath their calm faces. His openness made it easy for her to trust him with thoughts she usually kept hidden. By the time they reached her neighborhood, the connection between them had shifted from simple conversation to something deeper, unspoken, and quietly intimate in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with being understood. As he pulled up to her house, the soft hum of the engine filled the space between them. Emma hesitated again before opening the door, not wanting the moment to end. She could feel her heart beating faster, not in fear but in awareness. Awareness of something blooming beneath the surface, fragile but undeniable. Their eyes met in the mirror one more time, and the look they shared held a depth neither of them tried to hide. Not attraction, not longing, but recognition. Two people crossing paths at the exact moment they needed someone to see them. "Take care, Emma," he said softly, the sincerity in his voice settling into her chest like gentle weight. She stepped out slowly, walking toward her front door with her heart caught between confusion and comfort. When she looked back, he was still there, waiting to make sure she got inside safely. She lifted a hand in a small wave, and he responded with an easy nod before driving away. Inside the house, the familiar emptiness greeted her again. But this time it didn't swallow her whole. Something inside her was shifting, awakening. Something that felt like the beginning of a truth she had tried to ignore for too long. She wasn't looking for love. She wasn't seeking danger. She wasn't chasing excitement. She was simply responding to the quiet warmth of being noticed, being heard, being valued in a way she hadn't felt in years. As she sat on the couch, listening to the soft rain outside, she pressed a hand to her heart, trying to steady the emotions swirling inside her. It wasn't about Michael, not truly. It was about the reminder that she was still alive beneath the tired routines and lonely nights, that she still needed connection, still needed to feel like a person with a voice and a heart that mattered. And as the rain fell steadily against the windows, Emma realized that something between yesterday and today had shifted her life in a direction she never planned for. A direction filled with questions she wasn't ready to ask and truths she wasn't prepared to face. But for now, she let the quiet fill the room, knowing this was only the beginning of a change she could no longer deny. Emma woke before sunrise the next morning, her heart already carrying the weight of thoughts she had tried to ignore the night before. The house felt strangely hollow, as if every sound echoed longer than it should, and the quiet pressed around her like fog. She moved slowly through the kitchen, making coffee just to keep her hands busy. But the moment she took her first sip, she realized her mind wasn't on the quiet morning or even on Daniel's empty spot beside her. It was on the way she had felt in the cab yesterday, the calm, the connection, the sudden awareness of her own loneliness. She had tried to push the thoughts away, but they clung to her like soft threads she couldn't break free from. She checked her phone, half hoping Daniel had texted her something more than the usual updates. But all she found were a few short messages about meetings and travel delays. No question about her day, no warmth, no sign that he even noticed she was alone. Every message felt like a reminder of how distant he had become, and for the first time, she didn't feel sad about it. She felt tired, deeply tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying something too heavy for too long. By mid-morning, the rain had cleared, leaving the clouds stretched thin across the sky. Emma stepped outside to get some fresh air, breathing in the cool breeze as if it might settle the storm inside her. She started walking toward the small cafe near the end of her street, telling herself she needed a change of scenery, something simple to pull her mind away from everything she didn't want to face. But halfway down the block, she stopped, realizing she had no desire for coffee, no desire for anything familiar. She pulled out her phone, staring at the rideshare app, hesitating, knowing exactly what her heart was pushing her toward. She told herself she only needed a ride downtown, that she only needed a distraction. But when she requested the ride and saw Michael's name appear again, her breath caught in a way she couldn't explain. She tried to calm the flutter in her chest, reminding herself that it was nothing more than kindness between strangers, but the truth pressed quietly at her ribs. She felt something when she was around him, something warm, something dangerous in its gentleness. He pulled up within minutes, stepping out to open the door for her, and his smile came as naturally as breathing. "Good morning, Emma," he said, his voice as soft as the breeze that brushed past them. She felt a warmth flood through her, not romantic, not bold, just a deep sense of being seen. "Morning," she replied, settling into the seat, trying not to let her voice reveal too much. The moment the car started moving, she felt that familiar ease settle between them, a quiet space where she didn't have to hold herself together so tightly. Today, however, something felt different, sharper, heavier with unspoken thoughts. Michael glanced at her through the mirror, reading her mood without needing any words. "Rough night?" he asked softly. She took a breath and nodded. "Just a lot on my mind," she answered, her voice low, steady but strained. He didn't push for details, but his silence invited honesty, and Emma found herself speaking without planning to. She told him she felt lost inside her own marriage, not because of some dramatic betrayal or loud arguments, but because of the slow drifting, the quiet forgetting, the way she felt invisible to the person who once knew her better than anyone. As she spoke, her voice carried a trembling truth she had never said out loud before, a truth that startled even her. "I don't know when I stopped feeling like myself," she whispered. "I just know it happened slowly." Michael listened with a kind of patience she hadn't felt from anyone in a long time. His hands remained steady on the wheel, his expression thoughtful, calm, steady. When he finally spoke, his words were gentle but honest. Sometimes people don't realize they're drifting apart until they look up and can't find their way back. Emma felt her throat tighten at the truth of his words, and for a moment she couldn't respond. She looked out the window, watching the passing buildings blur into soft shapes, trying to blink away the sting in her eyes. The car reached a red light, and in the stillness that followed, she felt his voice cut through her thoughts again. "You deserve to feel alive," he said quietly. "You deserve to feel like someone notices you're here." Emma's heart swelled. Not with romance, not with desire, but with a sudden overwhelming sense of being understood, really understood, in a way she had been craving for so long. She turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes in the mirror, and the look they shared held a depth that made her breath catch, not because it was inappropriate, but because it was honest. She felt the shift happen inside her right then. A slow unwinding of something she had kept tied up for far too long. Her emotions were raw, unguarded, exposed, and she no longer had the strength to pretend she didn't feel them. When they arrived at the waterfront, a place she had asked him to drive to without knowing why, she didn't step out right away. She stayed seated, her hands resting in her lap, her pulse quickening as she wrestled with the growing realization inside her. Michael waited without speaking, the soft hum of the engine filling the quiet between them. Finally she turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what's happening to me," she said, her honesty trembling in the air. He turned in his seat slightly, not fully facing her but close enough for his voice to feel like a warm hand reaching out. "You're human," he said softly. "You're needing connection, and that's nothing to be ashamed of." She swallowed hard, feeling tears threaten to rise, not from sadness but from relief, because someone finally understood what she had been carrying alone. She stepped out of the car slowly, her legs slightly unsteady, and walked toward the edge of the pier, the wind brushing through her hair. Michael didn't drive away immediately. He stayed parked nearby, watching to make sure she wasn't overwhelmed. She stood looking out at the water, letting the breeze cool her heated emotions, feeling the weight of her choices pressing down on her. She knew she hadn't crossed a physical line, but the emotional boundary had already blurred, and that frightened her more than anything. When she walked back toward the car, he stepped out to meet her halfway, not too close, not too far, just enough to show he cared without crossing a line. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded, though her heart was still trembling. "I just needed air," she said. "I needed to feel something steady." He nodded softly, understanding without judgment. The ride home was quiet but charged with unspoken emotion. Emma sat with her hands pressed together as if trying to hold herself steady, and Michael kept his eyes forward, respectful, calm. But his presence alone was enough to make her chest ache with a mix of gratitude and confusion. When they reached her house, she hesitated before opening the door, knowing something in her life had shifted beyond return. She turned to him one last time, her voice gentle, fragile. "Thank you for listening," she said. "Thank you for seeing me." His expression softened, and he gave a slow nod. "Take care of your heart, Emma," he said quietly. "Don't let it disappear." The words settled deeply inside her, stirring strength she didn't know she still had. She stepped out of the car, walked slowly toward her front door, and paused with her hand on the knob, wondering what her future held now that she had finally admitted a truth she had been running from. Inside, the house felt different, not because anything had changed, but because she could no longer pretend she was untouched by the connection she had found with Michael, nor could she pretend her marriage was untouched by neglect. She stood in the middle of her living room, breathing heavily as the weight of emotion settled inside her. She knew she had choices to make, conversations to have, truths to face, but she also knew she couldn't go back to the version of herself who stayed silent and invisible. Something in her had woken up, something bright and fragile and brave, and though fear curled in her stomach, there was a new sense of clarity rising through her. She whispered softly into the stillness of the room, "I need to find myself again." And for the first time in a very long time, the words felt like the beginning of a new chapter, not the end of one. Outside, the sky began to clear, sunlight pushing through the clouds in thin, warm streaks that reached through her window, touching the floor at her feet like a quiet invitation. Emma stood still for a long moment, letting the light settle around her, letting her heart breathe, letting her truth grow roots inside her. She wasn't sure what would happen when Daniel returned, but she knew one thing with certainty. She could no longer shrink herself to fit a life that had forgotten her. And as the morning light filled the room, she felt the first whisper of strength return to her. A strength she thought she had lost forever. A strength that would guide her into whatever came next, whether painful, hopeful, or somewhere in Between it was the beginning of her becoming whole again, even if the path ahead was uncertain, even if everything she knew was about to change. Emma breathed in, steady and full, and let her heart finally speak the truth she had silenced for too long. She deserved to be seen, she deserved to be heard, and she deserved to feel alive, and the journey toward that truth had only just begun.